Hi everyone, my name is Ashleigh Trotter. I'm 25 years old and I'm living in Melbourne, Australia. I've just completed my studies. I've been studying a law degree and a Bachelor of Arts with a major in psychology and minoring in Behavioural Studies. So what I actually want to talk about today is my own experience with mental health, both with my studies and my own personal experience. I also want to say a massive big thank you to Sean and Marco for organising this. It's an absolutely incredible initiative, so big thanks to them. And if you don't already know, they're doing some amazing things, fundraising for charities. A lot of you would have seen the Instagram page, but if you go and look on the page, there's a link to the website. And on that website, there are a list of the organisations that they are fundraising for at the moment. And speaking of organisations, I just want to say that if there's anything that I talk about today that raises any concern for you, or there are any issues that you feel like you could benefit discussing with someone, there are a few organisations you can look into if you do want to seek some help. I know here in Australia there are places such as Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Mind, and also in South Africa I've put up a list of some of the organisations on the website so you can go check them out. And even if you're somewhere else in the world, you can look for these places, you can Google them. And I think the biggest thing that I want to get across with this is that there is so much help out there. There are so many resources, and most people don't know either where to look or that they can even look, that there are these resources available. So definitely I encourage anyone to go check them out, find some that you think could benefit you. And I also just want to say, just a trigger warning, that later on I will very briefly discuss suicide and my own experiences losing somebody that I know to suicide, so be warned that that will be coming up a little bit later. I want to talk about my experience with my studies. I've been doing a double degree, which means that I've spent the past 5.5 years studying, and whilst my psychology studies do not make me qualified in any kind of treatment or diagnosis capacity, I have spent the past 5.5 years going over and over the DSM-5 definitions of different mental health disorders. And for those of you that don't know, the DSM-5, it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, and it outlines almost every detail about any mental disorder you can think of. I'm going to go through a couple definitions in a moment, and I just want to start off and say that almost everybody will identify with probably all of the symptoms that I'm about to list. So please remember that this doesn't mean that you have a problem. Don't panic if you identify with a bunch of these. And if you do and you are really concerned, then maybe you should start to think about reaching out, maybe seeking help. But the biggest and most important thing is that everybody identifies with almost all of these symptoms. Alright, so the DSM-5 has the following criteria for the clinical definition of depression. And this is that someone must be experiencing 5 or more of the symptoms I'm about to go through during the same 2-week period. And at least one of those symptoms has to either be a depressed mood or a loss of interest or pleasure. So some of the other symptoms include significant weight loss or weight gain, a slowing down of thought, less physical movement, and this has to be something that's bad enough to be observed by other people. It's not just a subjective feeling of restlessness or feeling a bit slowed down. We've also got fatigue or a loss of energy nearly every day, feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt nearly every day, a diminished ability to think or concentrate, maybe indecisiveness, and also thoughts of death. But depression is more than just how sad you feel. It's not just the extent of your sadness. Clinical depression is how these combine together, how these factors combine together, and the effect that they have on an individual's ability to function in their daily life. So the DSM-5 looks at generalized anxiety disorder and considers this to be excessive worry occurring more days than not for at least 6 months. So the big thing to note here is that's a much longer time period than we were looking at before. And the individual finds it difficult to control that worry. And the anxiety is associated with 3 or more of the following symptoms: restlessness, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. And this anxiety or worry can cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So this is really important. This again, we see that it becomes a clinical problem when it's causing some kind of impairment in your life, somehow stopping you to function in the normal way that you would. This disturbance is not attributable to a substance, so like alcohol or drugs, and the disturbance is not better explained by another medical condition. So there's two really notable things when I go through these two, probably two of the most common mental health disorders, and that is that a lot of these symptoms overlap, which can make it really hard to diagnose sometimes, and that most of these symptoms are very common. Like I said, most of us can identify with all of these symptoms at some stage in our life. We all feel these things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a problem. The really big difference is the duration and the severity and how these symptoms impact on our daily lives. So obviously I'm quite exposed to this. I've got some experience. I think I know what I'm talking about. I have an understanding of the nuances and the differences in these things. What's the difference between sadness and depression? I have a very scientific approach to mental health. I know all these definitions. I know what chemical compounds change in the brain. I thought that I knew stuff. I have this degree. And in September of 2017, everything that I thought I knew about mental health was brought into question, and my world completely changed. I lost the very first friend that I'd made in Australia, the coolest person I'll ever meet, and probably one of the best friends I'll ever have. My friend Jack Hartley killed himself, and I've had a lot of thoughts on how much I should say about him and how I coped with his death, how I came to terms with what he'd done and how he'd done it. And if anybody does want to discuss this, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to talk about my experience and the things that helped me, but I also know that grief and pain are subjective. And there are a lot of things that I took comfort in that other people can't. And no two situations are the same, and no two people will respond to those situations in the same way. So I don't want to go into that too much unless somebody wants me to. Again, if anybody wants to reach out to me privately, I'm really happy to talk. And because that's it, my experience showed that that was the only thing that really helped me, was talking about it. So I'll say this, I am very lucky. I have an incredible support network, and when I think back to that time, I'm just so grateful because my friends and my family really carried me through that time in my life. And I think that loss makes you question a lot of things, and it makes you really unsure. A lot of doubts creep in. I started to doubt my knowledge. I knew all this stuff. I'd been studying psychology for 2-3 years. I thought I knew what I was doing. And how could I not know that somebody that I cared so much about was not only suffering so severely from depression that he resorted to doing what he did, but that I didn't even have an inkling that he was depressed in the first place. You start to doubt your relationships. If I didn't know Jack as well as I thought I did, then who else don't I know as well as I think I do? Were we not as close as I thought we were? You really start to question a lot, and for a very long time I just felt like I'd lost the ground underneath me, and I just wasn't as sure of my footing as I was before. So again, I'll say that I was lucky. I had the best support network that you could dream of. I was the best case scenario. I had friends, I had families, I had co-workers, my manager were all looking out for me during that time, And then 3 months passed, and then 6 months passed, and then a few more. And people start to move on, and they don't treat you like you're made of glass anymore. And that was around the time that I first realized how much I was struggling. Because when the dust settles, and you get back just enough of yourself to start to feel like you might be okay, and people start to treat you like you're doing okay, they start to treat you normally again. And that's when I realized that I wasn't okay. I felt like there was something wrong with me. I was emotionally unstable all the time. These things were building. I was still so sad, but I felt like I had to be okay. So I put on a brave face, but then that was just exhausting. And then that made me even more sad that I was struggling so hard with trying to be okay. And I'm so grateful. I have some friends, one in particular who stands out, who works in the mental health sector, and she checked in with me a lot and really pushed me in the right direction. And she finally convinced me to go see my GP, get a referral to go see a psychologist. And I booked in at a place here in Melbourne called Headspace. I remember my first session at Headspace with Annette, and the first thing that I said to her was, I feel so silly being here. I'm really embarrassed. And I remember thinking, I'm not depressed. I'm sad, but I'm not depressed. And I'm highly strung and I get very anxious, but I don't have an anxiety disorder. And I remember being so embarrassed that I lied to her and didn't tell her that I study psychology, because I remember thinking, I thought that if she knew that I studied psychology, she'd think, oh gosh, well, you should know better. You should know that you don't belong here, that you shouldn't be here. And thankfully, she's a trained professional who is good at her job and knows what she's doing, like all trained professionals. And when I said to her that I felt silly, she said, why? Why do you feel silly? She said something along the lines of, do you have a problem that you're struggling with? And I said, yes. And she said, well, do you want to manage it better? And I said, yes. And she said, well, are you currently managing it on your own? And I said, no. And she said, well, I can help you do that. So do you think that if you have something that you're not managing and I can help you manage it better, do you still think that you're silly for coming here to get help? And I think back now at how ridiculous my mentality was. And I don't understand why we have this idea that when it comes to mental health, that it has to be so bad. It has to be so bad, that you're ready to harm yourself, or that there's this really big problem before we feel like we can reach out and get help. I'll use the simplest analogy that I can think of. If you broke your leg, would you go get medical help? Of course. I mean, there's very few of us who could make a splint or reset a bone or even know that our leg was broken without medical help. So what if it was something less severe? Like a lot less. What if it was just a stomach ache? Would you go get help? Would you go see a doctor? If it was me, probably not. Honestly, if it was just a stomach ache, I'd probably just ignore it. But then, what if it came the next day and you still have it? What would you do then? If it was me, probably take some pain meds, some Panado or some Panadol as they call it here. And maybe that helps and maybe it goes away. But then it comes back the next day. And it comes back again the day after that. And then again and again and again. And then what? Then would you think, maybe something's wrong. Maybe I should go see a doctor because this isn't normal. And it's still just the same stomachache that you had on day one that I probably would have ignored. But the difference is now we know that it's not going away and that it's not normal. And I don't know why when it comes to mental health, we have this idea that only the broken leg deserves attention. When we treat a stomachache if it hung around long enough. And that's how I want people to start seeing mental health. That you can go get that help before it gets so severe. And the biggest, most important thing is that even if it's just a small thing, but it's not your normal, and you don't know how to fix it on your own, then there's absolutely no shame in going and getting help and getting somebody who knows what they're doing to help you try and fix that. We know there are things we can do when we're feeling down or anxious, and we'll have days when those feelings will be there. We're gonna get the stomach aches, and sometimes it's persistent, and we need that little painkiller to help it go away. And that can be anything as simple as going for a run, catching up with your friends and having a vent, or even changing your diet, eating healthier for a little while. And these small changes can have really big effects on our mental health. But if that's not working, if it's not going away, then you need to get help. And you need to find someone who can at least help you find the right thing to do. And there's not only nothing to be ashamed of in doing that, but it's actually the smartest and easiest thing you can do. Earlier this year, a friend of mine was going through some stuff. He had a lot of personal problems. He was just started a really tough new job, and he said to me, "I'm struggling, but it's not that bad." And I remember that thought. He said he was having trouble sleeping, that he was so stressed about work that not only was it making him physically ill, but he was panicking so much about his deadlines that he was really struggling to focus, and then he wasn't able to get his work done, and then it was taking him longer to get it done, and then he was panicking even more about his deadlines. And still, we get this narrative that it's not that bad. I'm really, really struggling, but it's not that bad. And I don't understand why we can admit sometimes when we're not coping, yet we think that getting help is somehow a defeat, rather than a strength, an action plan, a way of making it better sooner. And look, mental health is complex, and everybody's action plan is going to look different, and it'll take different amounts of times and different attempts to find the right way. But we need to make it normal to get that help. I had amazing friends, amazing, amazing people. But at the end of the day, I unloaded a lot of burdens on people who didn't need to carry my pain. And I could have not only been putting that in the hands of someone who's paid to deal with that stuff, but also somebody who's trained to help me find the most helpful response to deal with it. I want to emphasize that at no point in time was I ever clinically diagnosed with anything. I wasn't depressed, I didn't have an anxiety disorder, but this doesn't mean that I wasn't struggling with anxious and depressive symptoms that I had lost control over. I needed help, or my bad coping mechanisms were about to start having some serious consequences on my studies, on my work, on my friendships, the people taking, the brunt of my instability at that time. And look, COVID has been hard. My psychologist has been doing phone consultations, and I don't feel particularly comfortable having those phone conversations in my share house where I can be overheard. So I'm having to make alternative arrangements to check in with my mental health and be really vigilant about my reactions. But I also know that no matter where I am, global pandemic or not, there are people and there are resources that can help me if I'm struggling. But we need to be having these conversations. Have them with your friends, have them with your family, normalize mental health struggles. Say things like, "Oh, I've been feeling really down recently, but then I did this and it really helped." And now that person that you've told not only knows how to help you if you're feeling down, they already have a suggestion, but it's also something that they could use, a new idea that they could try if they're in a similar situation. We need to talk about this so you know that you're not alone. Mental health struggles are really isolating, and I think this gets worse the more severe it is, because you feel like you're alone, or you're different, or that you're going to be judged for not coping like everybody else. And talking about it is one way to make it less scary. And let's normalize seeing a psychologist for the little things and for the big things. But I think someone's more likely to seek help if they don't feel ostracized. I will shout it from the rooftops that I go see a psychologist when I'm not struggling, because I want any of my friends in a similar situation to know that it's normal to get help and to be able to go and get that help sooner rather than later. We all struggle. Everyone experiences these things at some stage in their life, and getting a professional opinion on what's the best way that you can deal with these problems is just a smart move. Now, not everyone needs to go see a psychologist for a therapy sesh. Not everybody needs medication, but everyone could do with a little advice on what directions to explore. Annette and I, we work on cognitive behavioural techniques. So when I go see her, we work on coping mechanisms and things that I can practice when I'm feeling overwhelmed, very practical stuff. Sometimes we chat and vent, because sometimes I need to let something out. And I've had conversations with her about medications. Psychologists, psychiatrists, even personal trainers, they all help in different ways. And they all have suggestions for you if one way isn't working. when I didn't know what direction to go in, I didn't know how to start seeking help, I went to go see my GP. I went to my doctor, and she referred me to the nearest sort of psychologist in my area that was within my budget. She helped me go over, the way they price it and how I approach that. So if you don't want to ask your friends, or if your friends don't know how to help, then go see your GP, go see a doctor. Google mental health services, and even if you contact an organization that can't help you themselves, they'll have the resources to point you in the right direction of someone who can. The biggest thing is just asking for help. Alright, well, this is me done. So to those of you that listened, I want to say thank you. And I want to say a big, big thanks to Sean and Marco for organising this. I think these events are necessary and important, and I think the fundraising that you guys are doing is incredible. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to talk about these things. I hope you can see how passionate I really am, and that I mean it when I say that. And I just want to say, talk to your friends, talk to your parents, talk to your doctors. Let's talk about mental health, and let's normalize it. All right, thanks so much.